Hi everyone, it's Ran here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you're well today. Today we're going to tackle another of those difficult topics, namely how to deal with an unhealthy INFJ. Now this obviously starts with identifying said unhealthy INFJ. Now we're going to take this in different steps, but before I move on, just keep in mind that I've written a book on the INFJ type, came out last September. The Ecstatic Soul, available in paperback and ebook format at all the Amazon links down below in the description box to all the countries. If you want to get the book but your country is not included, drop me a line and I will get back to you and we'll make it work. If you're used to the INFJ literature online, you want to go further, you want to go deeper, this is the book to get. It's gotten really good reviews so far, less than $10, so it's your call. Now, how do you recognize an unhealthy INFJ? Well, that's a big question, isn't it? Because the INFJ in general is a bit of a shapeshifter. And that's an element of its reputation that I think is pretty warranted, because the INFJ is so professional at making himself or herself dissolve their identity so that they can fit with the group, because fitting with the group is a less painful process than standing out with all their strangeness, their quirkiness, and their individuality. Now, I do explain in the Ecstatic Soul that this is not necessarily a winning strategy, and it's important to be in touch with your introverted intuition and to stand for your beliefs and for the originality of your thoughts and views on things, even if, of course, there will be many opportunities in life, many occasions where fitting in with people and allowing yourself to kind of stand in the background is the preferred option. You can also do a lot of observation there to feed your NI further. Now, this shape-shifting quality of the INFJ will also be found in an unhealthy INFJ. Now, there's absolutely no doubt about it. The unhealthy INFJ is just as good at shape-shifting as the healthy INFJ is, except that the unhealthy INFJ will not necessarily want to use that particular strength, if you want to call it a strength, for good purposes. In other words, we're dealing with someone who might be deviously chameleon-like. It doesn't have to be the case, because unlike what you might come across online in the literature, which suggests that there's only one type of unhealthy INFJ, I would claim that there is many different types of unhealthy INFJs. And here I will focus on discussing only two types. I think the first of the two is the more well-known, which you could call the manipulative INFJ. The other one is a little bit less well-known, except to those who are frequenters of maybe MBTI forums or the INFJ Reddit or MBTI Reddit in general. And that's what I would call the paranoid INFJ. Now, these two actually don't come together to form a third blend, a potent blend, very often, if at all, for reasons that I think will be quite clear once I've clarified the two types. So maybe we can begin with the maybe slightly better known type, which is the manipulative INFJ. So why is the INFJ manipulative? Well, that's a very, very good question. Why are people manipulative? I guess you could offer any number of reasons why that's the case. It's a bit of a chicken and egg thing also, you know, is a person manipulative because they're unhealthy, or unhealthy because they're manipulative? I suppose, you know, it makes a bit more sense to say they're manipulative because they're unhealthy. Certainly someone who opts for manipulation, not very occasionally in moments where it suits them. Not that that's a good thing, but it's when it's a pattern, when it's something that they have turned into a primary mode of negotiating with other people and dealing with other people. Clearly it means that there is a void. There's a void somewhere in the person, and that they are somehow giving themselves the impression that they are filling this void by feeling like they can manipulate people, get people to do certain things, think certain things, by having, in some sense, power over people. I think that you know, a manipulative person is someone who likes to have people under control while staying behind the scenes. There are people who like to be in control, but they don't want to receive if you like, the obligations of the leader type. They may not have the qualities of the leader type, but they can affect their influence without having to take on that role and its responsibilities. And I think that can happen to a number of INFJs. It can happen to INFJs where they feel this void. Maybe there are INFJs who have a strong sense of the prescience and the vocation that comes with it, to use two concepts that I refer to in this book. A strong sense that they have an underlying mission in life, even if it's a vague notion. They might be frustrated that they don't seem to find a way of putting that to the test and making it happen. And that instead of projecting themselves into collaboration with other people to clarify the meaning of their insights, for example, and to lead projects together, they continue in this behaving from the stance of seeing people as enemies and potential harmful critics of their thoughts and what they have to say. And they therefore tend to assume that the best way to prevent that from happening is not to turn the interaction into collaboration from that perspective of a collaborative spirit, but to actually make these people defenseless and harmless by having them puppeteered or manipulated. So there's a void that needs to be filled. And what happens with the unhealthy INFJ in this case is that NI, of course, NI remains dominant. It's a dominant function. It can never actually drop down the list to make FE dominant. But NI is no longer, although it remains dominant, it is no longer the world, the meaning, the provider of meaning to the worldview of the INFJ. The provider of meaning becomes FE. And specifically, how FE invests relationships with other people with meaning, and the ability of the unhealthy INFJ to dominate other people through manipulation becomes the sole purpose and indeed the meaning of their worldview. And NI in this case, again, it's still dominant, but it's relegated to providing not so much meaning, because that's done by FE, but providing a functional apparatus to enhance FE's ability to manipulate by being a keen observer, having keen intuition, and knowing what makes people tick, what people will like to hear, what people won't like to hear, how people can be manipulated. So NI just becomes hyper-functional, but less of a provider of meaning. That's a reversal of roles, and it is a problem for the INFJ, and it's a sign that the INFJ is unhealthy. You'll notice too that because of this, there is a very, very great emphasis on FE and on changing the function of NI somehow. The emphasis is almost entirely on NI and FE together, which means that you'll notice in the unhealthy INFJ, and actually that will apply to the other type of unhealthiness as well, is that the unhealthy INFJ tends to have pretty weak TI. And if you see them take a test, their cognitive functions tests, for example, how reliable they are is a whole other question. But they'll tend to score very low on TI. And now that could be a cause for wondering, like, how is it possible for an INFJ to score low on TI, like a 5%, like it's the weakest function almost? It's often happens with unhealthy INFJs. I've wrapped my head around that for a while, and I still cannot completely explain it, at least not exhaustively explain it, except to suggest that this hyper-reliance on an NI-FE as the quintessential function for manipulation, combination of functions, because TI, being reflective and analytical by definition, tends to work against manipulation by pinpointing it, could be working against the two main functions. TI is repressed and has to be repressed. It's not just unconscious, it's not just dictated by the environment, it's repressed on purpose or half-consciously. And so if you notice that TI does not seem present and that there is seemingly this extreme combination of FE and NI on this part of an introvert, a clear introvert who nevertheless seems to behave like a kind of ENFJ at times, this might be the sign that you're dealing with an unhealthy INFJ of the first kind, the manipulative INFJ. Now the INFJ of the second kind, the paranoid INFJ, is also an INFJ that demonstrates a very low TI. And again, if they were to take a cognitive function test, assuming that the cognitive function test is reliable, they'd score 5-10% on TI, whereas you could imagine that a normal INFJ would test at least 55-60% in the case of an NITI subtype, maybe up to 80%, 85%. So you're dealing with a tremendously low TI in the case of that type of INFJ, and yet it seems quite clear they're introverted. You can see the NI quite clearly, and although you do not necessarily see as much FE, you derive the FE from the absence of FI, and particularly from the need that the paranoid INFJ has of convincing other people of their vision. So the focus here is on NI, but it is, as it were, somehow severed from the correlated functions. First from FE, and second from TI, and even more so from TI. And you will see in a second that the reason why TI is so decorrelated is because it will not be allowed to obstruct the workings of NI, which become autonomous. But also FE is detached from NI to an extent, because the paranoid INFJ really cares about making the contents of their NI true, as opposed to truth neutral, and an inspiration to making true statements following the functions of judgment. If you like, as long as you see NI as a bottomless source of potentially prodigious intuitions that need to be refined by the functions of judgment, you're using your NI correctly, and you're also not repressing it. Now, when you use NI as a function of perception that produces directly true statements and true intuitions, that is to say, not really intuitions, but true observations, conclusions. If you start to see NI as a purveyor of truths, of ready-made conclusions, that can somehow bypass the functions of judgment, as if it were a function that combined within itself perception and judgment at the same time, you're in the realm of INFJ paranoia. And you have to deplete FE and TI to a large extent because you want NI to take on the roles that FE and TI normally play. TI for parsing the information, analyzing it, and allowing it to reach the status of truth from your perspective, and FE is the transfer of the FE quality to NI, supposedly, is that of reaching out to other people, discussing it, and getting confirmation from other people that your conclusion is indeed true. So in the paranoid INFJ, you have the three functions somehow combined in one, and none of the functions profit from that, because NI is distorted. It becomes a function concerned with truth, whereas it can never be concerned with truth directly. It has to make use of TI and FE in the case of the INFJ, of TE and FI in the case of the INTJ. FE is relegated to the pure function of exposition to other people, but it's not asking for their confirmation because the INFJ who's paranoid has already attained the conviction by themselves. And TI is very much neutralized and is not understood when it is utilized by other people in critiquing the paranoid INFJ. First, the FE is not understood because it's one-directional, one-sided, and TI is not understood because if it were, it'd be seen to completely threaten the NI intuition in the first place, because the NI intuition, having absorbed the TI function inside the paranoid INFJ, has also neutralized the TI function by the same token. So it cannot accept TI observations from other people, because if it did, it would essentially disfigure the entire enterprise of paranoia that the unhealthy paranoid INFJ engages in. And so what you often notice, and I'm not saying that this is any evidence that alternative theories of truth or conspiracy theories seen from the perspective of taking an interest or even a fascinated interest in them is a bad thing. It is not, and I want to reassure my audience about this. This is really what I think. Nevertheless, what you'll notice online, again, if you're on Reddit, if you're on INFJ forums, if you're on MBTI forums in general, is the paranoid INFJ is very often interested in conspiracy theories and alternative theories of truth, which in my definition are not seen as interesting possible alternatives that are considered from the point of view of almost something aesthetic and something stimulating intellectually from a spiritual point of view, but as a real take on truth, as what is really true, as opposed to, you know, the objective truth presented by experts, by the world, by the, you know, other people, and so on. So the paranoid INFJ is very concerned to create a truth for themselves, to create an NI insight that within itself contains the grain of truth, and because they utilize FE, they feel the need to share that with other people, but it doesn't matter how much other people try to convince them that they could be wrong, that they're probably wrong, that they're big logical and evidential flaws in their reasoning, the paranoid INFJ will almost not react. Either they will just not respond to these critiques, or they will suggest that the critics, who are very often well-intentioned, are blinded by whatever force and not willing to see the truth. So they're asking you to just trust them on faith. So that is pretty much a summary of what I consider the two main types of unhealthy INFJs, both illustrating, very clearly exemplifying, if you like, an abnormal dysfunctional use of the cognitive functions. First place, the manipulative INFJ, and the second place, the paranoid INFJ. I'd love to see in the comments if you relate to this, if you've encountered those subtypes before and how you've dealt with them. Also consider dropping me a like and subscribing. And don't forget about my Patreon page. I'm still looking for supporters to guarantee my independence in the future. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.